Okay, so we've got to assess the risk in each area and consider what impact it might have on our organisation. So two things: the frequency, so how often it is likely to occur, and the second thing is the severity, so the degree of loss resulting from the occurrence. If it's catastrophic loss and it's likely to happen frequently, we've got to do something about either not going ahead or finding a different way to do it. So this likelihood versus severity, we can use a Likert scale and put values on things, but we've got to look at likelihood, the maximum probable loss, and severity, the maximum possible loss. So, the likelihood of these things happening can be, generally sought out, and so we do what we can to minimise those opportunities. And in terms of severity, critical will cease to exist if this event occurs. So, you need to be very much aware of that. Severe, major impact, it might be recoverable with, other things that we might do. Important, it's a large impact, but we can recover. Less important, a minor loss. And if it's negligible, there's no perceptible loss. So, not the end of the world. Now, one of the things that we often do is, of course, set up a risk register. And this is not a bad one. And you can feel free to sort of put something like this in your assignment. But there are others available, and you can see there's a website there that'll give you sort of some access to this type of thing, but there's many of them available on the web. And this goes, what's the risk, consequences, the likelihood, the adequacy of the existing controls, and basically work through in terms of, how important is it for us to fix that or take protection against that. And what we get, of course, is this likelihood and consequences chart. Things that are almost certain and major or catastrophic, they're a critical risk. In other words, it'll be the end of our business. And so, we need to consider those things and make sure we do everything we can to, minimise them. If they're in the low risk green category, well, they're not going to have much impact on us, and, the overall damage is, unlikely. When it's rare that it occurs, and even if it's minor damage, we can take that risk. And sometimes we don't do anything about that risk. We just, we wear it, if you like. The next thing, of course, is our avoidance in terms of, how we go about doing things. Don't do the risky things. We can transfer the skills or the responsibility to somebody else. Insurance and something like can do that. Accept or retain. Ignore the effect of the risk, and if you're in that green category, that's fine. Or if it's in the yellow category, not so bad. But once you get into the orange or the red category, well, accepting or retaining the risk, for your organisation is starting to get, an unusual and risky decision. And reduction or loss control. Anything you can do to limit the damage caused or the chance of the risk affecting you. In other words, what can you do to sort of, hive the risk off. In terms of avoidance, entails avoiding or abandoning activities that have a loss potential that is too great, so catastrophic or high loss, and non-essential to the mission of the organisation. So removal of trampoline competition at high school gymnastic competition, not booking unruly rock band that is known to create serious problems. So, trying to minimise that risk that might occur. Since risks are the spice of physical activity, we know that in most sports there is a level of physical risk. When there's body contact sports and other things, there is a physical risk. And if we took all the risks out of sport, there's no competition. So, we may as well just go for a walk along the beach and don't go too close to the water because that's dangerous, right? So we don't want to be in that situation. I jumped ahead a bit there. There we go. Transfer, shift the loss to another person or entity, contractually or through insurance. Now, one way of doing that is insure. We can use waivers or releases. However, we can't waiver responsibility for things that we do that are negligent. So when you buy let's say you buy a lift ticket for the ski resort, you are responsible for still your own behaviour. So you can't say, well, I bought a lift ticket and on the back of it, the ski resort says, we take all care and, but while you're here, you're on your own. We're not accepting any responsibility. But if they put a steel stanchion across the middle of the track and don't tell anyone and people come along and break their legs, well, that's negligence, and you can still, despite the waiver on the back of the ticket, you can still sue them on that behalf. And having said that, you know, if people know that they take on a risky activity, I'm sure you sign a waiver when you go skydiving and other things to say that, you know, you understand that this is a physical activity and there is chances that you might be injured. But as long as there's no negligence on their part, you're taking that responsibility. We can offload the job to somebody else who's got insurance. We can indemnity clauses, agreements that hold owners and landlords harmless for any negligent acts or omissions by rental groups. So if you're hiring a ground, for instance, you know, you might indemnify the owners of that facility, provided again that they've got the facility in good condition. And we can often, you know, when you've got independent contractors like concessionaires or vendors that are selling food and everything else, they indemnify you against, you know, selling, you know, not healthy food or whatever. And contributing negligent laws, the law acknowledges that certain activities are inherently dangerous and that participation in that activity, by virtue of participating, you accept some of the burden of the loss should it occur, and that's a part of it. Acceptance or retention, retain the risk and prepare for potential loss through budgeting, deductibles or self-insurance. We can do that. We can do some things that sort of minimise the risk, so get qualified staff, train them properly, and this is one of the things that happened in the Gold Coast with that facility. People weren't trained on how to operate those rides properly, and that's going to be a major law case, or it is a major law case against the operators of the theme park. We're going to select appropriate venues for the different sport. We don't play, you know, major football games on, you know, fields that have got wombat holes all over them, because you'll surely get broken ankles and knees and everything else. We've got to abide by all laws and codes, and that's a no risk issue. You know, if you are breaking the law, you're putting yourself at financial risk and legal risk. And implementing standard operating procedures and have them documented. So in other words, they have to be in writing and people have to sign off that they've followed those things. And, you know, if we can do those things, that works pretty well for us. The next part of that, of course, is, you know, you've got to know your local obligations, meet with all the local requirements and state and federal requirements, develop regularly scheduled inspections of your assets. So make sure that the facilities are meeting safety standards and everything else. Regularly schedule maintenance with safety concerns given priority, and monitor your visitors for security reasons. Personnel can cause harm and expose the organisation to loss, illegally searching people, false imprisonment, improper employment practices, sexual harassment, of course, assault and battery, verbally or abusing or touching people, invasion or breach of privacy with people's information, and just professional malpractice if you've got, you know, professionals doing things and they reaching their responsibility. And you've got to look at, you know, what exposure you've got with these types of things. Improper employment, recruitment, termination of employment. Before you can terminate employee these days, you've got to make sure that you have people properly trained and give them the opportunity to do their job, give them the tools and everything else. And if they are not performing well, you've got to counsel them and give them warnings before you just terminate them. Got to go through evaluation, discipline. Things must be properly noted, and people have to understand what the rules are. How you go about promotions, transfers and salaries and everything else. You need to make sure that you're meeting government minimums in terms of salaries and other things. In terms of business operations, you know, we need to be careful about the things that we do. We can do some things, provide in-house fitness programs to reduce absenteeism, monitor the conduct of employees to prevent fraud, and seek legal advice periodically to ensure that contracts are comprehensive and enforceable. And in terms of property exposures, now this is a you know, an important one. This is again. Providing proper fencing, adequate locking systems, keycard access, CCTV to prevent vandalism and inappropriate behaviours, making sure that you know, you've got fire prevention strategies in place and lots of fire extinguishing sprinkler systems and everything else. Implement a plan to carry out the selected method, monitor and evaluate. So once you've got a plan in place, It should be in writing, and everybody should sign off on that plan each and every time you run an event. And the thing about that, I guess more than anything else, is we assign certain responsibilities to people. We always talk about empowering people in the marketplace, and this is a very important part of that. Assign the risk responsibilities. We can tell people what their responsibility is, train them properly and everything else, and get them to sign that they're following that procedure. So then you've at least got to come back against people who are not following the procedure. For event-specific risk management, sport business is no different from other projects. From a risk point of view, imperative that participants and spectators be provided a safe, secure and accommodating environment. Follow your risk management steps, allow the risk plan to identify unique needs of the sport, and make sure, again, that these things are in writing and that everybody is aware of the things that you do. And so areas that you need to be responsible for: venue preparation, safety audits, crowd management plan in terms of issues. You might have seen the Australian Rugby League team playing in Papua New Guinea. Suddenly 1,000 people ran onto the field because one of the light towers looked like it was moving and about to fall over. So you've got to consider those things, check all the codes and regulations that are in place from government and everything else, and make sure you've got insurance, transport and parking all set up. Pre-event venue preparation, proper marking and fields, clearing the accesses, both for in and out, placing collateral and fencing around the event area, safety audits and these sorts of things critical. Check the codes and regulations, make sure that you can get your insurances right, identify the things that you can pass on to others, and you've got to consider the cost of insurance against the level of risk. If the risk is minimal and minor, well, at that point, maybe you're willing to not insure against that because you can bear the cost. If the impact is potentially, thousands and thousands of dollars, well, you may be better off to spend, $1,000 on insurance to make sure that that doesn't happen. And we want to, make sure that we do all those things, but we cannot insure against criminal charges and jail time. So you bear that in mind. Making sure that people are well trained in parking lot areas. You've got licensed drivers and everything else to make sure they've got clear records and everything else. Crowd management, real issue today. You've got to have effective signage. You've got to make sure you've got trained people. What happens in an emergency? And you've got to plan for those things. I was a volunteer driver for the Olympics in 2000, and we went through weeks of training in terms of venues and what to do in emergencies and all the rest of it. So it was quite substantial, and you had to go through that process. Training people how to respond to patron requests, how to respond to emergency situations, and outsourcing to trained specialists if necessary from a proper organisation. Crisis management, have a emergency action plan for bomb threats, tornado, inclement weather, fire and medical emergencies. For large activities, venues with lots of people, you have to have medical services available, and they need to have access. You need to be able to get ambulances in and out as part of it. Crisis management, crowd security. Well, there's so many issues with crowd security now, and so many things that we have to be aware of. But, protecting our players, protecting our officials, referees and others, and other event attendees. So, when you get drunken attendees and everything else, security has to remove them and make the environment safe for all attendees. Insurance is a cash management tool, not a risk management tool. It's a way of transferring the financial impact of a risk eventuating. And, not all risk is financial, and we do have a duty of care which cannot be transferred. And there's different types of insurance, of course, public liability and other types of things. So that's basically it for this. I'm sorry that I've had to send you this on a YouTube video, but for some reason the other one didn't go through. So hopefully we'll get this out to you, and make sure you get your assignments in, and we'll go from there.